A starving little girl knocks on a rancher's door, offering to wash dishes so her sick mama can rest. He nearly turns them away, until she says one line that shatters his heart. The knock was soft, too soft for a man like Amos Granger to notice if not for the silence in the cabin. He had just finished supper alone, the crackling fire the only sound besides the slow ticking of the clock over the hearth. He stared down at his plate, half-eaten beans gone cold, and thought the wind had rattled the door. But then the knock came again. 3 taps, timid, not the kind of knock that came from someone looking for a fight or a favor. Amos pushed back from the table, groaning as his knees popped. His ranch had been quiet for months, ever since his brother passed and the cattle were sold off. No visitors came this far anymore. There was nothing for them here. He expected to find a drifter, or maybe one of the town boys up to mischief. What he found instead stopped him cold. A girl stood on the porch, small, thin, maybe 9 or 10. Her cheeks were hollow, eyes wide and too big for her sunken face. She clutched the sides of her threadbare dress like she was holding onto the last bit of dignity she had. Her hair was dark, tangled from wind and dust, and one of her shoes was missing. Behind her, just past the porch steps, lay a woman on a makeshift stretcher made of 2 branches and a blanket. Her face was turned away, but Amos could tell she wasn't asleep. She wasn't moving. "I ain't got no work," Amos grunted before the girl could speak. "No food to give either. You're lost, little miss." The girl looked down, then raised her head with more strength than he expected. "If I wash your dishes, sir, would you let Mama rest?" Her voice trembled. "She's too tired to ask herself. Her throat, it don't work so good anymore." The air left Amos's chest. He stared at the child, then at the still body behind her. No wagon, no mule, no blankets besides the one beneath the woman, just the wind, the cold, and that voice. He opened the door wider. The girl hesitated like she wasn't used to people saying yes. Then she stepped in quickly, barefoot and careful not to track dirt. Amos followed her out to the woman, crouched beside her and checked her breathing. It was shallow, faint, feverish to the touch. Her lips were cracked and dry, and her wrists were thin as kindling. "Name," Amos muttered. "Her name's Ruth," the girl said from behind him. "Mine's Nora." Amos didn't answer. He lifted Ruth into his arms. She barely weighed more than a sack of flour. He carried her into the cabin and laid her on the cot near the fireplace. Nora stood frozen near the table, watching every move like a wild animal expecting a trap. "Boil water," he said gruffly. "I got medicine somewhere. You know how to help her." I try," Nora whispered. "She coughs a lot, hurts to breathe. We came from Carson Ridge, but we had to walk after the wagon broke. Took us 5 days." That broke something in Amos's heart he hadn't felt in years. He found the old tin of fever tonic he kept from back when his brother was dying, mixed it in with boiled water, added a cloth to Ruth's forehead. All the while, Nora moved like a mouse. She washed the dishes with water so cold her fingers turned red. She used soap sparingly. Amos didn't speak. He didn't ask more questions, but he watched. When the cabin quieted again, Ruth stirred. Her lips moved, trying to speak. Nora rushed to her, kneeling beside the cot. "Mama, rest, please. I did the dishes. He's letting us stay." Ruth blinked, tears spilling down her temples. Amos turned away. That night, Nora curled up on the rug beside the cot. She didn't ask for a bed, didn't complain, just took her place beside her mother, hand resting on Ruth's arm like she could keep her heart beating with sheer will. Amos didn't sleep much. In the morning, he found the girl already awake, sweeping the cabin with a broom too big for her. She'd made porridge from the oats and water, not touching a bite until she tried to feed Ruth first. "She's better today," Nora said, "not coughing as much." Amos nodded once. He still hadn't figured what to do with them. He didn't have money, or much food. He'd closed off from the world for good reason. But now, this girl with hollow cheeks and that one line at the door had wedged herself into the quiet. Midday came with clouds. Snow threatened early and Amos chopped more wood. Nora followed him out, bundled in a too-thin coat that used to belong to his niece. She helped stack the logs without being asked. "You always take care of her?" he asked. Nora nodded. "Since Papa died last winter." "You got no kin?" "Not anymore." She said it flatly, not for pity, just truth. That night Ruth woke enough to whisper. Her voice was like broken glass. "Thank you," she rasped to Amos as he passed her a cup. "Rest," he muttered. "Ain't done nothing yet." Nora kept close, watching every breath. 3 days passed. Ruth began to sit up for short spells. Amos started adding extra potatoes to the stew, extra logs on the fire. Nora tried to sew a tear in his shirt without asking permission. She made his coffee too strong, burned the eggs, but every mistake came with a soft, terrified apology. Then came the letter. Amos found it in the mailbox, though no one was supposed to come this far anymore. No horse prints, just a note, sealed, no return address. He opened it with calloused fingers. "You took them in, that means it's begun." That was all it said. No name, no signature, just that sentence written in shaky ink. His blood ran cold. He didn't sleep that night. The next day he asked Nora again, "Why'd you come to me?" She blinked. "Mama said there was a man in the hills who don't turn away the desperate. Said you were hard but honest. Said if anyone give us a chance, it'd be Amos Granger." Amos's hands trembled. No one was supposed to know he was still alive. How'd she know that? Nora looked at him, confused. She just did. And then Ruth whispered from the cot, her voice stronger than before, but filled with fear. "Because someone told me, long ago, that when the time came, I'd have to go to the man with a broken heart and a locked door." Amos froze. Outside the wind howled, and the snow began to fall. End of Part 1, Part 2 next. Part 208. Amos didn't speak after Ruth's words. He stood there by the fireplace, jaw tight, eyes locked on the woman who lay wrapped in his old wool blanket. She wasn't supposed to know anything about him. Not the cabin, not the past, not the heartache he kept buried deeper than his old war rifle under the floorboards. He told himself she was delirious, fever talking, but the way she looked at him, clear-eyed, calm, like she knew more than she should, shook something loose inside him that had stayed frozen since the day his own family had been buried under soft snow on that same hill. He moved to the window. The snow was falling harder now, flurrying in sideways gusts that slammed against the log walls. The sky was a heavy gray, the kind that promised to seal them in by morning. "You believe in signs, Mr. Granger," Ruth whispered. Amos didn't turn around. "I believe in work, and snow, and people lying when they need something." A dry cough, then silence. Behind him, Nora quietly swept the floor again. She did it whenever the room got heavy, like she thought staying busy might hold everything together. She had a rag tied around her waist as an apron now, fashioned from a piece of feed sack. Amos noticed her fingers were cracked from soap and cold water, her cheeks still too thin for a girl her age. "I'll fetch more wood," she said suddenly, grabbing the pail. Amos opened his mouth to stop her, but she was already out the door before the wind could even hiss through it. He went to follow, but Ruth's voice stopped him. "She's been doin' that since her father died," she said softly. "Talkin' care of me, mackin' herself small. I tried to tell her she's still a child, but she stopped listenin' when she saw me cough up blood." Amos glanced back. "She said he died last winter." Ruth nodded. "Fell through ice tryin' to get firewood after a snowstorm like this. He was a good man, gentle, honest. We had nothing, but we were happy. When he passed Nora, she grew up overnight." Amos leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "She carried you all the way from Carson Ridge. Dragged me on a sled till the rope snapped. Then she tied me to that stretcher she made from branches. Slept under me at night so I wouldn't freeze. Amos stared into the fire for a long time. Ruth's voice trembled. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't say that for pity, it's just truth. I fought long as I could, but if I go, she's got no one. You'll rest here, he said. That's all that needs worrying for now. Before Ruth could reply, the door burst open with a sharp gust. Snow spilled in across the threshold, followed by Nora, breathless, arms full of logs, and eyes wide with something more than cold. Mr. Granger, she gasped, there's someone common. I saw a lantern, out by the tree line. Amos moved fast. He snatched his coat from the peg, grabbed the rifle from beside the hearth, and stepped onto the porch. The snow blinded him at first, but then, sure enough, through the whipping flakes he saw it, a swinging light moving slow, deliberate, headed right toward his cabin. He didn't wait. He moved out past the fence, boots crunching against crusted snow. The figure was cloaked, hooded, and rode a mule that looked near collapse. When they saw him coming, the figure stopped, raised a gloved hand. I come in peace, came a voice, hoarse, dry, older. What do you want? Amos called, not lowering the rifle. The man pulled his hood back. His face was wrinkled, scarred by time, one eye milky with blindness. A thick beard covered half his face, and he looked like he'd been riding for days. I'm looking for a woman and a girl, one sick, the other small. They passed through Ash Fork 4 days ago. Folks said they were heading this way. Amos didn't flinch. Why? The man slid off the mule slowly. His movements were stiff, like he was brittle inside. I was sent to watch them, protect them, but I lost their trail when the snow started. They're not safe, Mr. Granger. Someone's following. Someone who don't want them alive. Amos's grip tightened on the rifle. How do you know my name? The old man gave a sad smile. Because the same person who told Ruth to come to you, told me to make sure she got there. Amos stepped back. That's not an answer. No, the man agreed. It's not, but I don't have time to give you the whole truth yet. Just this, someone has been tracking them since Carson Ridge. Not just for robbery, for something else. Amos stared at the man. His instincts screamed to shut the door and send him off. But the look in the man's eye, what was left of it, held no lie, just urgency. You got a name? Amos asked. Bishop, the man said. Folks used to call me that when I still preached, before I broke more than I healed. Amos lowered the rifle slowly. Come inside. Back at the cabin, Nora watched the man like a deer. Ruth tried to sit up, her eyes narrowing when she saw Bishop. You shouldn't be here, she said faintly. Bishop bowed his head. I had no choice. They sent word, said the threat was moving faster than we thought. Who? Amos asked. Who sent word? Bishop looked at him. The same man who gave you this cabin, who gave you that rifle, who gave you a second chance when you buried your family on this land and tried to drink yourself into the grave. Amos's heart thudded. Only one man had known all that. And he'd been dead for 7 years. Jedediah, Amos whispered. Bishop nodded. He said you'd need redemption one day, and that it'd come knocking, with small feet and a dish rag. Amos sat hard in the nearest chair. The wind howled louder outside. Nora crept closer to her mother. Is this bad man coming here now? She asked in a whisper. Ruth didn't answer. But Bishop did. I believe he's close. He's been asking about a child with dark hair and eyes like winter frost. He don't want her living. I don't know why yet, but I mean to find out. Amos stood. Then we don't wait, we prepare. He moved to the hidden trapdoor near the fireplace, pulled it open. Inside was more than a rifle. There were pistols, powder, canned goods, old maps. Bishop's eyes widened slightly. You kept it all, he murmured. I wasn't ready to forget. That night they reinforced the windows, boarded the back door. Ruth slept fitfully. Bishop stood watch by the fire. Amos sat at the table, cleaning the rifle he hadn't fired in years. And Nora, she sat near her mother, whispering a prayer Amos hadn't heard since he was a boy. Lord, keep Mama warm. Let her breath come easy. And if you can, don't let the bad man find us. The wind screamed, the fire crackled. And miles away, on a ridge overlooking the valley, a man in a long dark coat looked through a spyglass at the cabin light in the distance. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just turned to the figure beside him, a massive shape cloaked in furs. "She's there," the man said. The figure grunted. "And the girl?" "Alive for now." The man closed the spyglass. "Then tomorrow we knock." End of Part 2, Part 3 next. Part 308. The morning broke with a silence so thick it pressed against the cabin walls like a held breath. Snow blanketed everything, tree limbs, rooftop, fence rails, muting the world in white. But Amos Granger was already up before the dawn, boots on, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes scanning the ridge where the dark shapes had gathered in his dream. Only it hadn't been a dream. He knew it the moment he'd opened his eyes. There was no bird song, no breeze, no animal tracks in the snow. Even the trees stood too still. Something was watching, waiting. Inside, the cabin creaked with small movements. Bishop knelt beside the hearth, stirring coals back to life. Nora sat beside her mother, spooning warm broth to her lips. Ruth looked a shade stronger, but not enough to move on her own. Her lips had regained a hint of color, but her eyes, they were clouded with dread. "She knows he's close," Bishop said, low and grim. Amos didn't ask who. He didn't have to, the man in the coat, the one who sent the letter, the one who was coming. "Did you sleep?" Bishop asked. "No," Amos replied. "You remember how to shoot?" Amos's lip curled just slightly. "I don't forget what saved me." He pulled back the curtain just an inch. Nothing, just snow. A white ocean between him and the horizon. Still, he could feel it, the weight of a threat you can't yet see but feel pressing on your chest like an iron. By midday, they'd secured the perimeter again. Laid rope trip lines between fence posts. Stacked crates by the windows as makeshift barricades. Amos gave Nora the smallest pistol he had, one he kept for trapping, and taught her how to fire it. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. "I don't want to shoot anyone," she whispered. "God willing, you won't have to," Amos replied. "But if someone comes through that door who ain't welcome, you don't hesitate. Understand?" She nodded. Ruth stirred behind them, her voice hoarse but clear. "Don't let her take that burden, Amos. She's just a child." "No," he said quietly. "She stopped Bane, just a child the day she dragged you 5 days across the hills." Bishop paced like a caged wolf. Every so often, he'd pull out a crumpled piece of paper and study it, drawings, names, and a red mark circling the bitter hollow valley. Amos finally asked what it was. "Old map," Bishop muttered. "From before the war, back when the land was still being fought over. This place, it ain't just a cabin, it's a crossroad, a place where stories end or begin." Amos stared at the map, the red circle inked right over his cabin. "You tellin' me there's something under us?" "Not under," Bishop said, "through." Ruth coughed and sat up straighter, her face tight with effort. "The man chassin' us, he don't want me, he wants Nora, he thinks she's a key." "A key to what?" Amos asked. But Ruth only shook her head. "I don't know, he came to our old town once, lookin' for girls born on the 7th hour of the 7th day of the 7th month, said it mattered, said there were prophecies in the hills. I thought he was mad." Amos turned to Nora. "When's your birthday?" She hesitated. "Mama said I was born just after sunrise, on July 7th. The room went silent. The only sound was the hiss of the fire and the distant howl of wind down the ridge. "Of course," Bishop muttered. "The old ones talked about this, a girl born in 777s. They said she'd bring peace or wrath, that men would try to use her, bend her, break her." Amos didn't believe in superstition, not the kind that came out of dusty books and whispered tales, but he'd seen enough death to know evil was real, and the things men would do to feel powerful again, they were always worse than the storms. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and long shadows crawled across the valley, Amos caught the first sign. A black bird perched on his fence, watching the cabin. It didn't move, didn't caw, just stared. Raven, Bishop said grimly, always the first sign. Amos stepped onto the porch and aimed. The rifle cracked, the bird dropped, but when he got closer there was no body, no feathers, just a patch of disturbed snow and a symbol drawn beneath it, 3 circles, intersecting, carved into the ice like a warning. He buried the mark under a shovel of snow and returned without a word. That night Ruth called Amos to her side. "There's more," she whispered. "I wasn't going to say, but I saw him once, the man, the one in the coat." "Where?" "In my dreams. He stands over Nora while she sleeps, whispers things in tongues, makes her flinch." Amos felt a chill pass through him. "And what do you see when you try to stop him?" Ruth's eyes welled. "Nothing, I wake up and she's always cold, like she's been touched." He moved to Nora's side immediately. She was asleep near the hearth, arms wrapped around a ragged doll. Amos knelt beside her and placed his hand near hers. Her skin was ice cold. "Nora," he said softly, "wake up." She stirred groggy. "Is he here?" "No," he lied, "not yet." The storm came hard that night. Wind whipped the shutters. Snow piled past the windows. But it wasn't the cold that kept Amos awake. It was the hoofbeats. Far off at first, then louder, 4, maybe 5 horses, then silence again. Bishop loaded his rifle. "They're testing us," he said. At dawn there were no tracks in the snow, not one. It didn't make sense. Until Ruth said, "They don't leave tracks, not unless they want to." The following day passed like a clock ticking toward some terrible hour. Nora stayed close to Ruth. Bishop sharpened a blade with slow, methodical strokes. And Amos, he wrote a letter, sealed it in oilskin, left it beneath the floorboards with the family Bible and the deed to the land. If anything happened, he didn't want her story forgotten. That evening, as the last rays of sun painted the sky orange and blood-red, Nora suddenly stood still beside the window, her small hand pressed to the glass. "They're here," she whispered. Amos stepped up behind her. There, just at the tree line, stood the man in the coat. He was tall, thin, motionless. His hair was dark and slicked back beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, he only stared. Beside him was the massive figure Amos had glimpsed in the spyglass. A brute of a man, draped in wolf pelts and leather, eyes gleaming like coals. "They won't come yet," Bishop said from behind. "They want us afraid, worn thin." Amos stepped outside anyway. He marched across the yard, rifle in hand, snow up to his knees. He didn't stop until he was within shouting distance. "You're trespassing," he growled. The man didn't blink. "I'm claiming what's mine." "There's no claim here," Amos spat. The man's voice was soft, but it carried. "Every child born of sevens belongs to the dark unless claimed by light. This one wandered. Now she is due." Amos's hand clenched on the trigger. "She ain't going anywhere." The man smiled faintly. "You can't stop what was written, Amos Granger." "You don't know me," Amos said. "Oh, but I do. I know the names you buried, the nights you begged for death, the prayers unanswered." Amos's chest heaved. "You leave them alone." The man tilted his head. "You've already been warned once. The letter." Amos raised the rifle. But the man and his brute turned and vanished into the trees without another word. That night the snow stopped. The wind died. The sky cleared to reveal a moon too bright, too full. Nora didn't sleep. Neither did Amos. And far above them, something ancient watched with bated breath. End of Part 3, Part 4 next. Part 408. Amos sat at the window till his breath fogged the glass and his knuckles turned white from how tight he held the rifle. The man's words echoed through him like hoofbeats on hollow ground. You can't stop what was written. Amos had stopped a lot of things in his life. A bullet from reaching his brother, a cattle stampede from crushing a boy, a war from taking his soul completely. But this felt different. This wasn't something he could outshoot or outrun. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Bishop sat by it, one leg stretched out, sharpening a dagger without speaking. Ruth had fallen into a restless sleep, her hand curled protectively around Nora's. The child had barely spoken since she saw the man at the tree line. Her eyes darted to every creak, every shifting shadow on the log walls. She was trying not to cry. Amos could tell. She was too proud, too used to being strong. He stepped away from the window, knelt by her side. "You cold?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. She shook her head. "Hungry?" She shrugged. He hesitated, then reached into the shelf and pulled out a sliver of hard candy, one of the last ones from a tin that hadn't been touched in years. "Used to be my daughter's favorite," he said, offering it to her. Nora looked up at him, eyes shimmering. What was her name? "Clara," Amos said after a pause that lasted longer than it should have. She was 7, sweetest girl in Bitter Hollow, always singin', laughed even when her feet hurt from walkin'. Nora took the candy like it was made of gold. She unwrapped it slowly and tucked it into her cheek. "What happened to her?" she asked. Amos swallowed hard. "Same thing that happens to most folks round here when the sickness comes, and no one listens soon enough." Nora reached out and placed her hand on his knee. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. They sat like that till Ruth stirred again, coughing. Bishop went to her side and dabbed her forehead. She was burning again. The fever had returned with a vengeance. "She needs stronger medicine," Bishop muttered. "More than we got." Amos moved toward the shelves, rummaging through the tins and bottles. "We've got willow bark, old whiskey, maybe." "No," Bishop said. "She needs poppy, and only one place has it." Amos turned. "The Ridge." Bishop nodded. "There's a preacher lives just north of the Ridge, keeps a hidden stock for emergencies. Ruth saved his boy once, years back. He might give it up if we ask nice." "That's a full day's ride." "And another back, I'll go." Amos shook his head. "You ain't riding alone." Bishop looked at Ruth. "If we wait, she might not last the night." Amos turned to Nora. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. "Don't let Mama die," she whispered. He exhaled hard, then grabbed his coat and rifle. "I'll ride," he said. "You stay here and guard them, keep the fire up. Don't let that man near the door." Bishop hesitated. "You sure?" Amos was already out the door. The storm had passed, but the snow was deep. He saddled his mule with practiced hands, packed only what he needed: jerky, rifle, a small satchel for the medicine. Before he left, he knelt in the snow and whispered a prayer he hadn't dared speak in years. "God, if you're listening, don't let that child be left alone." Then he rode. The Ridge was 20 miles east, through narrow mountain paths and old mining trails barely passable in the best of times. The snow turned everything into white ghosts, trees, rocks, even the mule. But Amos knew the trail. He had taken it once before, the day he buried Clara and her mother, the day he gave up. Now he was riding it again, for someone else's child. As the cabin shrank behind him, Nora stood at the window and watched him disappear. She sat beside her mother, feeding her sips of water. Bishop moved around the room like a restless wolf, checking weapons, sharpening blades, muttering prayers that sounded more like warnings. "Why does he want me?" Nora asked after a long silence. Bishop sat across from her. "There's people in this world who think they can own everything: land, gold, even people. And then there's ones worse than that, who think they're owed something by God himself. That man in the coat, he believes you're part of a story written long before any of us were born, and he means to make you play your part whether you want to or not. But I don't even know what part that is. That's the danger, Bishop said softly. Not knowing what you are makes you easy to bend. She looked at her hand. I don't feel special, I just feel scared. He reached out and gently closed her fingers into a fist. Then hold on to that fear. Not all fear is bad. The right kind of fear keeps your eyes open. Meanwhile, Amos pressed on. The wind was biting, the trail narrow and slick. Twice his mule nearly slipped, but Amos pressed forward, teeth gritted against the cold. By sundown, he reached the small chapel nestled between two crags on the ridge. It was half buried in snow, its steeple leaning like it was tired of standing. He knocked once hard. The door opened slow. An old man with a scar down his face peered out. "Granger," he said, blinking. "Preacher Mace," Amos replied. "I need Poppy." Mace opened the door wider. "How bad?" "She's dying." "Then you'll have it." Inside the chapel was simple, wood benches, a cracked altar and shelves of herbs. Mace moved with speed, pulling jars, wrapping cloth bundles. "You always did show up when things were on fire." "I didn't come for me." Mace studied him. "That's so." Once the medicine was packed, Amos turned to leave, but Mace grabbed his arm. "There's been whispers, Granger, things in the hills, wolves howling at wrong hours, people seeing shadows with no man cast in them." "I know. If it's the same man I think it is, he ain't human anymore." Amos didn't reply. He mounted and rode hard. The return trip was colder. He didn't stop, not for water, not for rest. And when he came over the last ridge and saw the smoke, his heart sank. Black smoke, thick. The kind that doesn't rise from a warm hearth, but from fire meant to scare. He kicked the mule into a run. As the cabin came into view, he saw it. The front door had been torn off. One window shattered. A blood trail in the snow. He didn't stop. He barreled off the mule before it stopped moving, rifle drawn, heart hammering. Inside the cabin was chaos. Furniture overturned, firewood strewn, and in the corner Bishop, bloodied, clutching a pistol in his left hand, breathing ragged. "They took her," he rasped. Amos dropped to his knees. "Who?" "Ruth tried to stop them. She got stabbed. He coughed blood. "I killed one, the big one's still alive. Took Nora, said they were heading east, to the old cave." Amos looked around. No sign of Ruth, just a sheet pulled over a shape near the hearth. He bowed his head, then stood rifle in hand, face like iron. Bishop tried to rise. "You can't go alone." "I ain't leaving her with them." "They'll kill you." "Then I'll die on the trail." He stepped into the snow again, breath like steam, eyes locked on the horizon. Nora was out there. And so help him, he'd bring her home. Even if he had to walk through the mouth of hell to do it. End of Part 4, Part 5 next. Part 508. The trail eastward was lined with clawed wind and silence broken only by Amos Granger's heavy breaths and the rhythmic crunch of his boots in deep snow. Each step dragged blood from his limbs, but he welcomed the ache. It was all that anchored him to the world. The bag of poppy root bounced lightly against his side, useless now. He hadn't spoken a word since leaving the cabin behind, and he wouldn't until he held that girl again. Nora was gone. And Ruth had died alone. Amos hadn't uncovered her face. He didn't need to. He had buried enough people, seen enough eyes lose their light, and there was something too sacred in leaving her covered, untouched, the way Nora last saw her. He'd whispered her name once under his breath, then turned to the trail without ceremony. He knew where they were taking the girl. There was only one place east of the hollow with a history of ghosts and shadows, the Splitmouth Caverns. Even the old bounty riders wouldn't go near it. It was where outlaws had vanished in the dark decades ago, where whispers passed through the rocks like voices lost in time, where lanterns flickered and went cold without cause. Amos had been there once, when he was 20, tracking a killer who disappeared inside. He hadn't spoken of what he saw, what followed him out, and he'd sworn never to return. But now she was in there, and he would go back. Hours passed in gray silence. The sun dipped behind the peaks again, casting long blue shadows across the valley. The forest thinned, and then the mouth of the cave appeared, a gaping black scar against the snow framed by jagged stones that jutted like broken teeth. Tracks led to it, heavy boot prints, drag marks, something too large to be human. He unslung his rifle, stepped forward. The air changed. The cold was colder here. It was not just winter cold, it was memory, dread, a shiver that reached the bone and whispered, "Leave." But Amos moved forward anyway. Inside, the walls narrowed quick. The roof dipped low, forcing him to duck. Dripping echoed through the stone like slow heartbeats. He followed the trail deeper, pausing only when he saw the first sign, chalk markings along the wall. Circles, lines, the same ones from the snow where the raven vanished. And then he heard it. A voice, high, terrified. "Please let me go. Nora." Amos surged forward, nearly slipping on the damp rock. The tunnel widened into a larger chamber, where torchlight flickered orange and red against the stone. Shadows danced along the wall, and at the far end he saw her, Nora, tied to a post, her mouth covered, her eyes wide with tears. Between them stood the man in the coat. And beside him the brute. "You took too long," the man said without turning. "I had hoped we could speak before I hurt her." Amos leveled the rifle. "Let her go now." The man chuckled softly. "I remember that voice, when you screamed your wife's name, when you buried your child without speaking. Don't you dare say her name." "Clara," the man whispered like venom. "She burned with fever. You held her till the last breath, and then you drank yourself numb, waiting for death to claim you too." Amos didn't blink, "And yet I'm still here." "You're an empty man," the stranger said, turning slowly now. His eyes were coal dark without white, like burnt holes in paper. But even an empty vessel can carry fate. Behind him the brute grunted. He was half a man, half a beast, taller than Amos by a head, arms thick with corded muscle, eyes dull with obedience. "What do you want with her?" Amos asked, stepping forward. "She is a gate," the man said. "A key. Her voice, her breath, she carries the bloodline. There is a path that must be opened, and only one born of 777s can call it forth." Amos's hands tightened on the rifle. "She's a child, not your key, not your prophecy." The man smiled. "Children are always used in great wars. What better vessel for purity?" Behind him, Nora whimpered. Amos saw her eyes lock on his, and that was all he needed. He fired. The shot struck the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways, but he didn't fall. He screamed, more out of rage than pain, and then vanished behind the brute who charged. Amos dropped the rifle, drew his knife, and met the charge head-on. They collided hard. The brute was faster than expected, his shoulder slamming Amos into the stone. The wind flew from his lungs. The knife clattered to the ground. The brute raised a massive fist, but Amos ducked, rolled, came up behind him, and grabbed the knife. He buried it in the brute's thigh. A howl. The brute turned, backhanding Amos across the jaw. Blood filled Amos's mouth. His vision swam. But he didn't fall. He moved like an animal, leaping up, grabbing the brute's throat, digging thumbs in until the man screamed. They crashed into the stone wall. Amos drove the knife up into the ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. The brute collapsed. Amos staggered, panting. The man in the coat stood across the room now, cradling his wounded arm, eyes blazing. You've only delayed the storm. I'm not here to delay, Amos growled. I'm here to end you. You cannot kill me, I am written. Amos stepped forward, then I'll write you out. He threw the knife. It struck true, deep into the man's shoulder. The stranger screamed. But it was Nora who moved next. She had wriggled her hands free while the brute fell. She ran to Amos. Are you hurt? I've had worse, he gasped, wrapping one arm around her. From behind them, the man in the coat laughed. Take her hide, it won't matter, she's marked. Then the cave began to shake. Amos grabbed Nora and ran. The tunnel behind them rumbled as stone fell, blocking the way. They reached the mouth just as a final crash sealed the entrance. They collapsed into the snow, both gasping. The cave was buried. The man inside buried with it. Amos lay on his back, watching the snow fall from the shaken trees above. Nora curled beside him, trembling. He pulled her into his coat. You came for me, she whispered. Of course I did. Even after everything. He kissed her hair. You're not just some prophecy. You're a girl, a brave one. You don't belong to fate. You belong to you. She sobbed softly, and he led her. They stayed like that for a long while. When the sun rose again, Amos carried her back through the valley. The cabin still stood. Bishop was gone. So was Ruth. He'd buried her beneath the old oak, a cross made of fence wood marking her place. Amos didn't speak much the next few days. He just built, chopped, cooked. Nora slept, healed, helped where she could. One night she asked softly, Can I stay? He looked at her. You ever leave? She smiled for the first time in days. And somewhere inside Amos Granger, something began to breathe again. End of Part 5, Part 6 next. Part 608. The days that followed were strange, peaceful, yes, but that peace was thin and trembling like a crust over fire. Amos Granger could feel it, in the way the wind paused too long at the eaves, in how the birds didn't return to the trees, in the way Nora flinched in her sleep, whispering things she couldn't remember in the morning. Something had changed in that cave, been buried, yes, but not destroyed. Still, life resumed in pieces. Amos repaired the front door and patched the broken window. He used boards from the old smokehouse and sealed them with pitch and prayer. Nora helped without being asked. She didn't speak much about the cave, about the man in the coat, or about what she'd heard him whisper as she lay tied to the stone. But she stayed close to Amos, and when she looked at him, it wasn't fear in her eyes anymore. It was trust. The first morning she rose early and tried to make coffee. Amos chuckled. It's supposed to be brown, not black, he said gently, lifting the pot from the fire. Nora grinned sheepishly. Mama always made it too weak. I thought maybe strong was better. You'll learn, he said, pouring it out and adding snow to the kettle. That same morning he took her out to the ridge behind the cabin. The trail was icy, but the sun had finally come out. Together they stood at the edge, looking down on Bitter Hollow far below, just tiny specks of smoke and rooftops in the far distance. This is where I used to bring Clara, Amos said after a long pause. She liked to shout into the valley, said she could hear her own echo better than anywhere else. Nora tilted her head. What happened to her? Amos took a long breath. She got sick, real sudden, her mama too. I brought in the doctor from Bitter Hollow, but by the time he came it was too late. The fever burned through them like wildfire. He didn't speak for a while after that. Nora didn't ask anything else. She just stood beside him. Later she whispered, Do you think Mama's with them? I do, Amos said, and I think she's watching, proud of how brave you've been. Nora leaned into his side. Sometimes I still hear her voice when I sleep. That's not something to fear, he replied. That's the part of her that ain't gone. That night Amos built a second bed in the cabin, using pieces of old crates and leftover cloth for a quilt. Nora helped stuff it with straw and sewed patches from her mother's dress onto the corner. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She slept better that night. But Amos didn't. He sat at the window again, watching the dark. The cave was buried, but he couldn't stop hearing what the man had said. "You've only delayed the storm." "What storm and why her?" The next day Bishop returned. He appeared like a ghost, thin, ragged, limping from a wound to his side that he said came from a rider on the trail. "I had to circle wide," he grunted, easing himself into the cabin. "Didn't want to bring anything back with me." Nora ran to hug him, then paused awkwardly, unsure if she should. Bishop smiled and pulled her close. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her. "I should have protected your mama better." "It wasn't your fault," she said. "She saved me." They buried the brute's body behind the cabin, far from Ruth's grave. Amos said a few words, not for the dead, but for the living, so they'd know the line between justice and revenge was still clear. That evening Bishop sat with a map spread across the table. "I've been asking questions," he said, "and I got answers I wish I didn't." "Go on," Amos said, sharpening a blade. "The man in the coat, he's not gone. The collapse buried him, yes, but he knew it would. He let it happen. Said in some of the writings I found that death is the first door. He wants her to grow, to ripen." Amos looked up sharply. "Ripen?" Bishop nodded grimly. "He called her the seed. Said when the time's right, she'll either bloom with light or with fire, depending on what the world feeds her." Nora sat quietly by the fire, listening with wide eyes. "That cave," Bishop continued, "wasn't just a place to perform a ritual. It was a cradle, a beginning." Amos stood. "Then we end it before it blooms." Bishop looked at him. "And how do you propose we fight prophecy?" "We write a new one." For the next week they prepared. Amos trained Nora to shoot properly, no longer with the little trap pistol, but a real revolver sized down for her hands. She practiced with focus, each shot steadier than the last. Bishop taught her old hymns, songs that were used to steady frightened children in the darkest corners of the frontier. She took to them quickly, her voice soft but unwavering. Together they rebuilt the cabin into something closer to a fortress. Extra locks, reinforced shutters, hidden compartments for weapons. Bishop carved symbols into the beams, protective marks from old traditions. But even with all the preparation, there was no mistaking the sense of time running out. Each night the sky bled red at the horizon before the sun vanished. Each morning, the snow seemed to whisper. Then one evening, Nora came to Amos's bedside pale. "I saw him again," she whispered. Amos sat up instantly. "In a dream." She nodded, "But it wasn't just a dream. He was there, inside my head. I could feel him." "What did he say?" "That I was almost ready, that soon I'd choose." "Choose what?" She looked down, whether to open the door. Amos didn't sleep the rest of that night. Neither did Bishop. By morning they had a plan. "We need to go back," Bishop said grimly, "to where it started." "The cave?" Amos asked. "No farther." He unrolled a second map. "There's a place in the southern pass, an old chapel carved into the mountain. Before the war it was used by men who studied things most folks don't want to believe in. They built a well there, called it the Font of Remembrance. Said it could show you what you are, not just what you remember." Amos studied the map. "And what good does that do?" "If she's got a choice to make, then she deserves to know all sides, not just what that devil whispered in her dreams." Amos turned to Nora. "You trust us?" She nodded. "Then let's ride." They left before dawn. Bishop, Amos, and Nora on horseback, wrapped in cloaks, riding in silence. The trail south twisted through ravines and across frozen rivers. Coyotes watched from the cliffs. A hawk circled once, then vanished into clouds. After 2 days, they reached it. The chapel was hidden between two pillars of stone, half buried by landslide and time. The front doors were sealed with rusted chains and a cross carved from bone. Bishop broke the lock with a rock. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old prayers. Candles still lined the pews, though they were dry and brittle. The altar had collapsed, but the well remained, a dark pit at the back, ringed with stone and inscribed in languages Amos couldn't read. "This is it," Bishop said. "She drinks, she sees." Nora stepped forward without hesitation. She knelt. Amos reached for her hand. "You don't have to do this." She looked up. "If he's still in there, I want him out." She dipped the cup, lifted it to her lips, and drank. The world went still. Nora collapsed. Amos caught her before she hit the floor. Her eyes fluttered. And then she screamed. A scream so loud and sharp it made Bishop drop to his knees, and Amos grit his teeth. Her body jerked once, then stilled. Moments passed. Then she opened her eyes. They glowed. Not white, not red, but gold. She looked at Amos and whispered one word. "He's coming." And then the candles in the chapel exploded into flame. End of Part 6, Part 7 next. Part 708. The flames danced along the ancient chapel walls like living things, casting wild shadows that stretched and leapt like spirits just woken from a centuries-long sleep. But the fire did not burn. The stone remained cold. The wood unscorched. It was a fire of vision, of warning, not destruction. And in the center of it all stood Nora. Her eyes still shimmered with gold. Her face, pale and drawn moments ago, now looked fierce, older somehow, like something within her had unfurled, not taken over but awakened. Amos held her by the shoulders, steadying her as the last of the tremors passed. "Nora," he said, voice low and urgent, "what did you see?" She blinked once. Her pupils returned. The gold dimmed, but it didn't disappear. "He's not in the cave," she whispered. "He's beneath the hollow, deeper than the mines. He was never trying to open a door." She turned to Bishop, voice calm and steady now, too steady for a child. "He is the door." Bishop stood, eyes wide. "What are you saying, girl?" "I saw it. A long tunnel carved by hands not born of this land. It twists under Bitter Hollow, under the graves, under the river. He's been building something there, feeding it. Every soul he takes, every cry that goes unanswered, it grows." Amos exchanged a glance with Bishop. "You saw this in the water?" he asked. Nora nodded. "I saw everything. The moment I was born, the night Mama first coughed blood, the man's shadow standing at the edge of the trees before I ever knew his name. He's been watching for years, waiting for me to reach this age, because when I do, I become the vessel." Bishop stepped closer. "Then we destroy the vessel." "No," she said quietly, "we fill it." "What does that mean?" She turned to Amos. "You said we write a new prophecy. That means we choose what goes in the vessel. He wants fear, rage, weakness. But what if I choose something else?" Amos knelt to her level, staring hard into her eyes. "What do you want, Nora?" "I want to go home," she said. "I want to bury Mama properly. I want to live a life that's not haunted." "Then we fight for that." She nodded. But before they could speak again, a gust of cold wind slammed the chapel doors open behind them. The flames blew out in an instant. Silence followed, heavy, charged. Bishop raised his lantern. From the doorway, snow whirled in, and in its center stood the man. The coat, the wide-brimmed hat, the dark eyes. He was smiling. "You came all this way to see the truth," he said softly. "And still, you think you can run from it." Amos rose slowly, stepping in front of Nora. "I buried you." The man's smile widened. "You buried a body, not a will." "You're not talking her," Amos said. Who said I need to take her? The man tilted his head. She's already mine, has been since the first breath. The bloodline goes back further than you can imagine. Her soul was promised. Written. She's not a promise, Amos growled. She's a person. The man stepped forward. And people are weak. They cling to pain, to regret. That's why I endure, because no one lets go. You don't belong here. Neither do you. He raised a hand. The chapel groaned. Stone cracked. And from beneath the altar, the ground split open. Not like rock breaking, but like skin tearing. A hole yawned open, wide and dark and alive. Amos grabbed Nora. Run! But she didn't move. Amos, she said, voice shaking, I can feel him. He turned to her, gripping her face gently. Don't listen, you're stronger than him. But he knows me, he knows everything. You ain't alone, you hear me? Not anymore. Bishop raised his weapon. Get her out, I'll hold him. Amos hesitated. Bishop. G.O. Amos turned and swept Nora into his arms, charging through the side door as the chapel roof began to collapse. The man didn't chase. He only watched, eyes burning like coals in snow. They rode back to Bitter Hollow in silence. 3 days passed before they saw the cabin again. By then, Nora had fallen into a strange quiet. She spoke only when asked. She didn't eat much. At night, she murmured in her sleep. Amos kept the fire high and the rifle closer. Then on the 4th morning, Bishop arrived. His face was bruised, his hands torn, but he lived. I slowed him, he said, collapsing into the nearest chair. I bought us time. Time for what? Amos asked. For the final choice. He turned to Nora. You have to go back, not to the chapel, to the hollow. Nora didn't look afraid. I know. Amos frowned. That's madness, he's waiting there. She looked up at him. Then I won't make him wait long. By dusk they were on the trail. This time the air was wrong from the start. Bitter Hollow no longer looked like a place, it looked like a wound. Trees were stripped bare, though no storm had passed. The sky overhead churned in slow, unnatural spirals. No birds, no wind, just that same stillness they'd known before, but worse now, hungrier. When they reached the edge of the hollow, Amos paused. It's not too late to run. Nora shook her head. I'm tired of running. She took his hand. They crossed the threshold together. The town was abandoned or swallowed. Houses half sunken into the ground, doors broken inward, fences twisted into spirals of splintered wood. In the center, where the old meeting hall used to stand, now there was a pit. The same shape as the one in the chapel, only wider. And from it rose voices. Not one. Many. Hundreds. Weeping, laughing, whispering. Welcome home, came the voice behind them. They turned. The man stood just yards away, no longer smiling. You could have lived a life of peace, he said. You took that from me, Nora replied. I gave you a place, a purpose. You gave me pain. He spread his arms. That pain is power. She stepped forward. No, what I carry is not for you, not for fear, not for your rituals. The man cocked his head. Then show me. And she did. She stepped to the edge of the pit, raised her voice, and began to sing. A hymn one bishop had taught her. Low at first, then stronger. And the pit recoiled. The voices screamed. The ground shook. Amos dropped to his knees as the wind exploded outward from her. The man shrieked. What are you doing? Nora kept singing. The sky cracked. Light spilled from her chest, golden, blinding. The pit began to close. Stone crumbled. The earth screamed. And the man howled. His form flickered, glitched, Shadows peeled from him like burned skin. He lunged at her, but Bishop tackled him midair, driving a blade into his side. "Finish it," Bishop roared. Nora stepped forward and shouted one final line. "You don't own me." The light burst. The pit collapsed. And the man was gone. The sky cleared. The wind returned. The hollow was silent once more. They left the valley the next morning. Nora never spoke of the dream again. But at night, when she knelt by the fire to pray, her voice still trembled with something stronger than fear. It trembled with peace. Amos watched her grow, from a frightened girl with a dish rag and cracked hands, to a young woman who knew exactly who she was. Not a prophecy, not a vessel, just Nora. And that was enough. End of Part 7, Part 8 next. Part 808. Spring broke across the valley with a gentleness Amos Granger hadn't known in years. The snow melted slowly, the rivers began to hum, and wildflowers clawed their way up through the thawed ground like soft-colored promises. Bitter Hollow remained mostly silent. The townsfolk had not returned, and Amos suspected many never would. Some ran from ghosts, others from memories, and some, like him once, from themselves. But the cabin still stood. And inside it so did Nora. It had been 3 months since the hollow closed its wound, since the man in the coat vanished in a column of golden light and screaming shadows, since Nora shouted him out of her soul and into the earth, since Bishop collapsed after the fight, wounds too deep to save him. They'd buried him on the ridge beside Ruth, the cross carved by Nora's own hands. She didn't cry at the funeral, not then. But that night she fell asleep on Amos's shoulder, fists clenched and lips quivering in her sleep. And he held her until dawn, listening to the silence outside and hoping, fervently, wordlessly, that it would last. He never heard the man's voice again. No whisper in the woods, no blackbirds, no flickering shadows at the edge of the porch. Just quiet. Healing quiet. That was the first miracle. By May, the vegetable garden behind the cabin was sprouting green. Nora worked it every day, hands in the dirt, face to the sun. She had gained weight. Color returned to her cheeks. She laughed sometimes. Little things made her laugh now. The squeak of the door, the mule's stubborn braying, Amos's bad coffee. She still prayed every night, not out of fear, but in gratitude. She knelt without fail, her hair falling forward, and whispered names she didn't want the world to forget. Ruth, Bishop, Clara. Bishop had once said remembering was a form of rebellion. Nora made it her ritual. Amos, for his part, changed in ways he hadn't expected. He stopped hiding the photo on the mantel. He stopped drinking coffee alone. He even carved a second rocking chair for the porch, smaller, lighter, just for her. One evening, as they sat watching the sun fall behind the trees, she asked softly, "Do you think Mama would have liked it here?" Amos nodded. "I think she'd have never left." Nora leaned back, legs tucked beneath her. "Sometimes I dream of her, but it's different now. She's not coughing anymore, she just smiles. She knows you're safe. I don't think I ever was before." Amos looked at her. "You are now." Word spread eventually. First came the wanderers, tired men, hungry women, children with hollow cheeks. Amos gave what he could. Nora fed them warm bread and stew. Some stayed a night, others longer. A few helped fix the roof. One built a fence. Another left a sack of dried apples with no name. Then came the letter. Amos found it one morning, tucked under a stone near the gate. Handwritten. "I heard what your girl did. I lost my son to that thing's voice 3 winters ago. If she ever needs anything, send word to the chapel in Lark Hollow." Signed, The Watchman. Bishop had mentioned the Watchmen once, an old order of travelers who protected children marked by dreams. Amos had thought it nonsense. Now he read the letter twice and tucked it into his coat without a word. The second miracle came in June. Nora found a fox cub tangled in brambles near the edge of the trail. It was starving, leg twisted. She brought it home cradled in her coat. Amos expected it to die, but she fed it goat's milk and rubbed its leg every morning with balm made from pine tar and Ruth's old herbs. She named it Juniper. It never left her side. "Why the name?" Amos asked once. "Because it grows where others won't." He smiled. They built a schoolhouse next. Just a small one, 2 benches, a table, a wall of books Amos had collected over the years but never read. Nora asked to teach. He said yes. By late summer, 6 children were coming every Thursday from homesteads and farms scattered miles away. Nora taught them letters, numbers, songs, but also prayer, courage, how to listen to the wind. Amos watched from the doorway sometimes, arms crossed, heart too full to name. "She was meant for more," he whispered once, as he saw her kneel beside a boy struggling to sound out a word. Not just a prophecy, not just a vessel, a healer, a builder, a keeper of peace. The third miracle was quieter. It came in the form of a journal Nora left open one night. Amos hadn't meant to read it, but when he went to cover it from the night wind, his eyes caught a single line. Clear, whole. They made it through another winter, another spring. Amos wrote letters now, real ones, to families of the children Nora taught, to a chapel in Lark Hollow, to his brother's widow in Texas, just to say he was alive. Nora wrote too, pages and pages, stories, lessons. One day she said she wanted to write a book. Amos said he'd build her a desk. And he did. By hand. Right by the window. With her initials carved at the corner. In time, folks forgot about the Hollow's darker days. But Amos didn't. Neither did Nora. They just let the good grow taller. They let the peace take root. And when strangers came through, hungry and hollow, Amos would nod toward the cabin and say, "Go on, knock, the girl inside will feed you." And if they asked why a child would help someone she didn't know, he'd answer the same every time. Because once she stood at a door and asked a man to let her mama rest, and he did. The end.